Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Secret Learning Network's webinar, How to Be an Effective Presenter in Business. I would now like to hand the floor over to our presenter today, James Louisi, subject matter expert and workshop facilitator of Secret Learning Networks. James, if you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're located. Today what we're going to talk about is how to be an effective presenter in business. But before we get started, I want to go over a few things about the company. Secret Learning Networks, as you have seen through the scrolling slides, those of you who joined early, focuses on elevating skills and capabilities of people in product management and business management. We do this through focusing on our founder, who had written 3 different books, Product Manager's Desk Reference, Managing Product Management, as well as the Product Manager's Survival Guide. Many of our teachings that we do are based on these novels. This is our staff here at Secret Learning Networks. Please join us online on the internet and view our blogs. We update them regularly, and we talk about different topics in regards to product management and business management going forward. Annually, we hold a Product Management Leadership Summit. There's some information here if it's something you'd be interested in joining us in as well. And lastly, we also hold Product Management Essentials classes, 2-day workshops around the globe. If you're looking for or interested in attending one of these classes, please contact us and we could set you up in doing so. On to the presentation itself. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself before I jump into how to be an effective presenter in business. As I mentioned, my name is James Louisi. My background consists of selling within the financial services world. I then joined product about 10 years after I was in the sales force. And what I had found that while I was in product management and leading a team, I found that one of the most important skills that I had while I was in product management was to be able to present well. And therefore today, what I want to talk to you a little bit about is presentations. How do we present, and what does it mean when I say a presentation that we have to give? Many of us think about presentations as being main stage presentations. You've got to stand up in front of a group of people, large audience. But I'm going to tell you today, a presentation is much more than that. And as business leaders, we need to be exceptional at presentations in order for people to remember the information that we've given them and take action upon doing so. Some of the different business-oriented presentations that we give could be cross-functional team meetings. They could be project team meetings, meetings with your team or meetings with your boss. All of these are very important meetings that we go into that we want to make sure that the audience, that are the listeners that are across from us, can hear what we're saying, listen to it, remember the words that came out of our mouth, and then take action as well. So what we want to go over today is how do we do that? But before we get started, I want to ask you all to think for a moment. I want to ask you to think about who was the most unforgettable speaker that you've ever heard of. Take a minute and think of the most unforgettable speaker. It could be anyone from a famous speaker, a president, sportscaster, colleague, somebody you may have seen on a main stage or maybe not. Think about who that might be. Now think about what was the main thing that makes you really remember that person. What is that one trait that really made them memorable? Now take a look at the poll and mark which one was really fits the best to your answer. Good. Good. So as you could see, some of the things that really matter, the things that really make something memorable, is the passion, the engagement, the storytelling. So let me ask you this question. Yes, I believe facts and content and the real details of what are told are important, especially in business. But why do we spend so much time, so much of our energy, focusing on the words that we're saying if we're not presenting them in a way that's memorable, with the passion and the engagement and the storytelling and the humor. So now we want to talk through this and go through what are some of the pieces that we could start looking at. The 3 Ps, in order to make sure that the content, the information that we're delivering is memorable, so that you could be on that list of when I ask the question, who's the most unforgettable speaker? Maybe you're one of those people. So we want to talk about the 3 Ps. We want to talk about physical, the psyche, as well as the passion. We're going to start with the physical. As you can imagine, physical is your body, right? So how are you presenting yourself, and how are you making contact with your audience? The first thing I want to focus on is your eyes. Back in the day when I first took a presentation skills training class, they told me to scan the top of everybody's head, look over the top of everybody's head. I'm not sure that that's the best thing to do, because if somebody looks over the top of my head, I don't know if they're really making that sincere eye contact. So what I'm going to tell you is you want to really make sincere eye contact. We've heard the phrase, he can't look me in the eyes. What happens if somebody feels that way? It's a lack of trust. So we want to make sincere eye contact and make sure that we're building that trust with the audience that we have. And again, and I'll say this over and over again throughout this presentation, this could be across the table from a project team meeting, this could be on a stage, or this could be with a boss or a team member. Making that sincere eye contact is important. It also gives you clues. You can determine whether they're awake and they're with you, or if they're nodding off or not paying attention, or something that maybe bothered somebody. You could approach them about it, or they're questioning. Eye contact is very important. Next, I want to move to the physical and the movement. Now, many times this could be really utilized when you're standing in front of a group, whether it's an executive team or a project team. But movement is always important. You really want to move with a purpose in order to be more impactful and create fewer distractions. You want to embrace the space you have. Be comfortable with the space you have, but also you don't want to be swaying and dancing. We've all seen that person who goes back and forth, right? Sways back and forth, and it's sometimes very difficult not to do that. But even most important with movement is you want to remember to drop anchor, as I say here on this slide. You want to make sure you make a point at a spot, and then if you choose to move, you move with a purpose. Going back and forth repetitively is just as hypnotizing as those clocks that we would see in different cartoons and things where people would get hypnotized. So drop anchor, make a point, and move on. Hands. Boy, you're talking to an Italian right now, so this is one of my most difficult that I struggle with. I use my hands all the time when talking. But really the most important thing with your hands is to make sure that they have a home base position. The gentleman here on the slide, he chose to have his hands in his pockets. They could be clasped behind your back, clasped in front of you. But having your hands in a home base makes the movement of your hands, and when you choose to draw something or a picture with your hands, so much more impactful. And there's visual learners, people that see your hands move. If you're drawing a picture, throwing maybe a hand up in the air to show a rising stock market or something, they remember that a lot better utilizing your hands in the correct way. Hands are very important, home base, and make big, bold gestures. Next, we get on to your physical as far as your voice is concerned. I like this graphic because what this graphic does to me is says, we can start off presentations sometimes with a lot of excitement, but then at a certain point in time, unfortunately, often we go monotone. Again, it's very hypnotizing, and you'll lose the audience. Another thing I want you to remember is silence is okay. I'm sure many of us have heard that before. Be comfortable with silence, because you could prove your point much better sometimes. Gain the attention of your audience simply by being silent. You also want to be able to stress the big idea. If you're always talking at a high rate and you're always talking loud, you're never going to be able to really grasp them on what the big idea and the big thought is. So change your pace and your tone. Slow down when you need to. Be okay with silence. lastly on this slide, is also cut out the fillers. This is a challenge for most people. I've heard people speak for many, many years, but having those ums and those ahs in there, what they do is they give us time to think. And that's the reason why most people use these fillers. But if you embrace your silence and you utilize that as your time to think, again, you avoid utilizing distraction words and filler words, and you'll be able to be more impactful. So I covered the first P, it's physical. Again, I know that we're gonna move at kind of a quick pace today, but now we're going to move into psyche. And when I talk about psyche, before I move on, I want you to understand what I'm talking about here is how do we organize our thoughts and get in our head and get things organized before we present out. Again, this could be used at a group meeting, a team meeting. Again, it could be used for large presentations if need be. But organization is key. It builds our confidence, and it makes us more impactful to the group listening. So here, I want to propose a model of how to really put together a presentation and organize it to be sure that as we're putting this together, we're putting it together in a way that's repeatable and organized and helps us with our confidence. What this also does is it eliminates sidetracks. Us getting sidetracked in a meeting, somebody else sidetracking us, throwing topics maybe on an agenda that wasn't meant to be there. Here what we have is an organized way to be able to give a presentation, even an organized way to open a project team meeting, cross-functional team meeting. Present in front of your senior leaders, which, as we all know, are sometimes hard to corral and keep on point as well. What I'm going to do over the next few slides is I'm going to break down this chart. I'm going to take opening. I'm going to talk through some topics, and I'm going to talk through the summary, and then the next steps. And I just want to break this down. Again, this chart here in this model is something that takes a lot of time to review and to work, but it really is something that when you utilize it, it really helps to organize and helps your confidence going forward. First, the opening. All of us who give presentations know that we've got to grab them with a strong opening. Why is it so important? It's so important that we have an opening that grabs our listeners because, quite frankly, depending on the situation, they may not be expecting a very gripping, grabbing presentation. But when you come out and you use maybe humor or numbers or statistics or facts or something that really is shocking, that's how we grab our listeners. That's how we pull them in the beginning, and then we keep them with us. We could lose our listeners in the first 30 to 60 seconds if we do not have a strong opening to open our presentation. Also, our listeners could be right brain, left brain, which is why I say things like statistics are important, as well as humor, as well as other information, good storytelling, grabbing that in and bringing the audience closer. You want to avoid, as the picture shows, people nodding off and not paying attention, which for many of us, I'm sure we've seen different meetings that this happens. Be memorable by starting an opening and keeping their attention. The rule of three. This is an interesting one. What I'm going to say here is really what we want to do is use 3 agenda topics when possible when giving a presentation. And what that does is it makes the information easier to digest and more likely for you to come across as memorable. Let's talk a little bit about this. Why do I say 3? You'll see in society, 3 is the magic number. I mean, if we think about the 3 little pigs as we have here, you'll also note that there's many other characters that work in 3s. You have the 3 Musketeers, you have the 3 blind mice, you also have the Holy Trinity. You have in the news, you have weather, sports, news. 3s are key. Why does everybody use 3? Use 3 because once you go beyond 3, our brains start not being able to remember many of the topics at that point in time. That's why we have 3s. It's best for our memory, and society is up on this, and they use 3 with a lot of things that they present to us as people. I'm telling you, by using 3 agenda items and 3 topics, it makes it more memorable and something that your audience will walk away with remembering what those 3 are. It's also very important when you think about this to think about trying to find ways to have them remember what those 3 things are. You could use alliteration. You could use acronyms. You could use anything that helps them remember. For example, this presentation, the 3 Ps. It helps to remember what they may be going forward in the head of a listener. Then you also want to focus now. You have your 3 agenda items on what are the needs. What does the audience need to hear? I myself happen to have the problem of being quite verbose sometimes and adding a lot of things in there that maybe aren't so specific to the individual group because I want to talk or get sidetracked. This template and this outline gives you the ability to bullet out the details that you want to cover and make sure that going forward, as you're giving this information, it's precise and it's on point, and the listener is really grasping to what you're talking about. So make sure you give the information that's really needed. Next, I want to move on to the summary. Many of us may have heard, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them, right? Again, power of 3s, so that people remember what you're reviewing. People remember what you're talking about. Remember your 3 agenda items. They remember your key points. At this point, you want to reiterate each topic and then your key point for each one. You want to tell them what you told them in the beginning when you talk about what your agenda items are. You want to tell them under the agenda details. And then under summary, you want to tell them the key points of what you want to walk away with going forward. Another key point of this, what we call the WIFM. What's in it for me? What's the benefit to them listening? What's the benefit to them being there? Why do they care about these 3 items? Why do they care about the information that you're covering in this team meeting? Why is it critical? Why is it important for senior leadership to be listening to what you're talking about right now as you're in front of the room? Key points so they remember exactly what they need to know going forward within your summary. Close and next steps. This one, I will tell you, is one that is usually left off. And it amazes me to this day. It amazes me to this day how often we may enter a team meeting and walk away and say, what just happened? Who's doing what? What are the next steps? What was that person looking for? Because they weren't clear. At the close of all presentations, there should be a specific call to action. Any gray area at all in the minds of the listener will lead to a lack of action. We need to be clear and precise about what we're looking for our audience to do. It could be, as I mentioned, a project team meeting where it could say, okay, who's doing what by when? That's the next steps. It could be you could be asking for funding or resources from a senior executive team. You want to make sure that you're clear about exactly what you're looking for so that you can make sure that you get that so that you can move forward. It could be agreement by a large group. If you're proposing something and you want to get agreement from a large group, you want to walk around and the next steps, do you agree? And make sure you have that by the end of your presentation. Ideally at this point as well, you can tie back to your opening. I always find it very impactful when people tell a story in the beginning, tell something about their life or somebody else's life or something in the beginning as an opening, and then they tie that around to the close, right? Or there's an issue in the beginning, and they solve it in the end. It's very impactful to be able to tie the opening to the close as well. And at this point in time, as you're presenting, you'll ideally want to answer questions. Now, going back a little bit, questions are interesting. Many of us choose different times to answer questions. Right? Some people may want to choose to answer questions throughout a presentation or throughout a project, team meeting. Some people may want to wait to the end. The danger, obviously, of taking them during is that you could easily get sidetracked, where you may not be able to cover all your agenda items. So I recommend, depending on the situation, that you may want to put the questions towards the end. Then you have more control over how the meeting goes, as well as being able to answer questions afterwards as well. But you always want to set that up on your opening and then answer questions when you chose to do so. In this case, at the end of the presentation. So organization. I showed you this chart a little while ago. And this is really what we can follow to help make us more confident, help us be more memorable going forward. We walked through some of these, and we walked through them very quickly. Ideally, this work and everything that I'm talking about in this next hour is a longer period of time where we could really dig in deeper. But I talked through these boxes quickly for you. But it is very important to have the organization, and I recommend this template in order to do so. Organization, confidence, be memorable. The last P, which I think is great, is that when I did the poll earlier, a large percentage, highest percentage, thought passion was the reason why they had a person who was most memorable. They had passion. Passion is the one trait you can't teach. It's the only section that can't be taught. But the passion that somebody has around the topic that they are presenting is imperative to the success of that presentation. And I'm here to tell you that anybody who asks you to be anybody else when you do a presentation is wrong. Be yourself, make yourself unique and different from everybody else. So add your own personal touch. You don't have to get up there and be a cheerleader if that's not who you are. Give it your personal touch, be who you are, but the addition of humor, if that's the type of person you are, sincerity, touching on people's emotions, knowledge, it all builds the confidence in order for them to see you have passion. If you have passion, people will follow. People will remember your topics and will want to take action with what you're looking for them to take action on. And you will become a memorable speaker. So what did I cover here today? Talking about the 3 Ps. First P, being physical. By managing your physical actions while presenting, you avoid the potential for distractions that could otherwise minimize or destroy your impact. We talked about eye contact. We talked about voice. Being okay with silence. Be okay with silence and watch monotone. Talked about using your hands. Find a home-based position for your hands so that when you do your hand gestures, they are more impactful than they would be otherwise. We also talked about movement and dropping anchor. It's okay to move. You shouldn't be still. But be sure that you have a spot or two where you stop, make a point, and then you can move. We talked about psyche, the organization model. How to organize your thoughts, how to organize your presentation in a way that you will be organized. You could be more confident because you have the information here. You don't have 7 or 8 pages written down of exactly what you want to say, but you have a more detailed list here. You're able to look at this and practice. You come across more confident. Your audience will listen and remember what you said. Passion. We need to express all the aspects that make listeners believe what we are telling them. We do this through passion, energy, intelligence, humor, and confidence. This is what differentiates from others. I can't stress this enough. The passion and the personal touch when presenting a presentation to a group is critical. You want them to, you should not be anybody other than who you are. And they remember you for who you are by putting these 3 Ps together. So we've got the physical, we've got the psyche, and we've got the passion in order to create a fantastic presentation. So a couple of things here. As I mentioned earlier, we're covering a lot right now over a short period of time. Okay, we talked about some of the physical attributes, some of the psyche, and some passion, that when we put them together, we can create a memorable presentation. We could have you be that person. When I asked that question in the very beginning, who was the most unforgettable speaker you have heard? I want one of you to pop in the heads of somebody when that question is asked, because of the effectiveness of putting these pieces together. But it's a lot of information. There's a lot of practice that needs to take place from presentations. There's a lot of practice. Practice makes perfect when we're talking about presentations, and it's not something that you could just read or go through a webinar like this and be done. You've got to practice, practice, and practice. With that said, this webinar here today is actually a 2-day workshop as well. I'll ask you now if you think it's something that you want to dig in deeper with. What we do within those 2 days is we go over, this is a very high level, but we practice, and practice within those. We videotape, walk through, putting presentations together like you saw here today. We spend 2 days getting into details and getting in the weeds of having you get up and present. And quite frankly, we do it in a fun environment, an enjoyable environment. I know this is one of the top 5 fears of people in the world, which is public speaking or presenting. And I'm here to make it fun and help you learn a little bit along the way. And quite frankly, how you present yourself in business is going to have an impact going forward around your success. At this point in time, I'd like to ask if there's questions. I'd be happy to answer any questions from what we just reviewed.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. We do have a few questions that have come in. I would just like to remind everyone, if you would like to ask a question, just click on the Q&A button at the top of your screen and then select the Ask New Question button. Our first question, I am interpreting correctly that you are recommending that we introduce all 3 topics first and then go one by one through the details and then one by one for the summary versus the intro, diving deep into the content, summarize 1, and then move on to 2. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So let me expand on that a little bit. When we introduce each topic first, quite frankly, like when I started the presentation and said, and I started off with physical, psyche, and passion. And then we go back through that again and cover each one. We help people to remember what those 3 things are. It's a repetition of these are my 3 topics. Now I'm going to go through one of them. And then I'm going to go through the next in detail, and then I'm going to go through the following. And if we don't hit the key points in the summary at the end, we run the risk of them not walking away with the details that we're looking for them to walk away with. So we hit the 3 agenda items. We then go back through, here's 1, 2, and 3 of those agenda items. We then hit the key points of each.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, can you describe what you mean by home base for hand gestures?
Sure. A lot of times, especially like I was saying earlier with us Italians, we throw our hands all over the place. And we don't really have a place that we could call home or put our hands in a place so that when we make our big hand gestures, they could be impactful. So if you remember earlier on the slide I had with the gentleman, his home base was in his pockets.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Do you have any specific recommendations for how we can practice these techniques you've gone over today?
I do, actually. So as far as practice is concerned, which, again, as I mentioned, is the most important, I would take one thing at a time, but the first thing I would do is videotape yourself if possible. I would pick a presentation or something to present, and I know it's probably one of the hardest things to do, but as we all know, we are our own worst critics. So if you videotape yourself, you're going to see things that you would never have seen before. It's one of the reasons why I do this in the class. I like to videotape people because you see things that you would never have seen before, and because we're our own worst critics, we then want to fix it and keep doing it over and over again. And what we do in the class and what I recommend for yourself as well is in the beginning, we'll videotape, and then you look in the end. So then if you videotape yourself, practice, 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 videotape again, you're able to compare it from one to the other and be able to really see the change. So I would work on videotaping yourself now, practice and practicing, and then videotaping yourself in the end to be able to see the change in order to continue to get better.
Thank you. And who would you say your most memorable speaker is?
It's funny. My most memorable speaker is Jim Valvano. He, some of you may or may not know who he is. He was a basketball coach, and one of the speeches he gave on the ESPY Awards many years ago, about 21 years ago, and it was probably one of the most passionate speeches I have ever seen. The gentleman was dying of cancer at the time, and the way that he grasped the audience, the way that he spoke, and the way that he really made an impact on so many people, yet he needed to be helped up onto the stage. He was sick, and he was dying of cancer, and gave a fantastic, fantastic speech. I recommend it to anybody to go onto YouTube and to check it out if you have the ability to do so. I said it's funny you asked because another speech that just brought tears to my eyes recently was Stuart Scott from ESPN. He recently passed away and received the Jimmy V Award, basically for fighting cancer. And he just gave a fantastic speech as well. And he had things that you can relate to and remember. One of the things that he said was that he felt like he was losing the fight to cancer. But then he turned around and said, you know what, I'm not losing the fight to cancer. Losing the fight to cancer isn't whether you live or die. It's how you fight it while you're still alive. And again, those sort of things that we can say and with passion and really just emotion help us to remember those. So those are two speeches or two speakers that I feel are most memorable.
Thank you. Those are two good ones. Our next question, how do you feel about using slides in presentations? Any advice on what the slides should consist of or look like?
Great question. Yes. So I always say that less is more on a slide, and I think we've all heard that before. So what we want to do is, within the presentation, as you have just seen, and as of tomorrow, you'll be able to look at it again as a webcast. It should be coming out to all of you to be able to view on our website at secretlearning.com. But what you'll find is what I've done here is, in each topic that you go over, you want to make sure that your title slide is related to that topic. So you want to walk through it very similar to as you would in the format, in the organizational model. It's kind of difficult for me to show you from the phone, but what I would say is slides are okay, thin, not dense, and I don't use many of them. Quite frankly, when I do my training for the 2 days, I use very few, if any, slides. I use a lot of flip charts and do things that are interactive because I believe that presentations and whatnot should be a little bit more interactive and using flip charts and things to that nature. But I will say this. When we go through this and you're looking at creating a presentation, very often we need to use slides. Senior executives may expect us to. So title for each agenda, be sure that's at the top, and then bulleted list of the things you're going to talk about. But few slides and not dense.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the past, I've used an answer-first approach to presenting to senior leadership, where I start off with the answer or key takeaways before getting into the details of the presentation. How can I adapt your model to this, or are they just completely different?
Hoping I'm understanding the question. So an answer-first approach.
James, are you still with us?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yes, we are here.
Okay. My phone just got disconnected. I apologize.
No worries.
So an answer-first approach. I'm assuming that in this situation that questions had come in prior to the presentation, or that we are asking as they're entering the room what sort of questions that they may have. The challenge that we have there is the sidetrack nature. It depends on the type of meeting that we're looking to hold. One of the challenges we have if we ask questions first is that we may not be able to cover our agenda items during the presentation of the meeting. One way to avoid this, if you really want to get some data before the actual presentation, is maybe to reach out prior to the meeting itself to see what kind of questions people may have so that you're prepared, and then you could build them into the presentation yourself. But the challenge you may have is if you ask for questions up front, you ask for questions before you present the information you're looking to talk about, you may get sidetracked and the meeting may go in a different direction that you didn't want it to go into. You know, sometimes in our project team meetings that happens, right? Somebody's got their own agenda that they want to come in with, and they could sidetrack us on different things. So that's the caution. One of the ways to avoid it may be to check in prior to the actual meeting to see if there's certain questions you need to approach during the training or during the presentation.
Excellent. Now, I've been told that in a presentation, especially one-on-one, that you have about 7 minutes to get your point across because you'll lose attention after that. What techniques do you recommend to re-engage the audience when doing longer presentations?
That's a good one. I've heard a whole bunch of different numbers, right? I've heard a whole lot of different ideas of how long certain things should be, and they should be this long or they should be that long. And quite frankly, I think it's up to the speaker to be able to keep the attention longer. And I'm hoping that over the last 40 minutes I've kept the attention of some of the people that are on here for longer than the 7 minutes. One of the ways to do that is to, again, keep the information relevant to the audience and make sure that you're not lulling them to sleep with certain gestures or tone or things to that nature. That's the most important thing when we're talking. People can listen for longer than 7 minutes. You've got to make sure, though, that they understand what they're listening to, that you're detailed, that they understand what your topic is and what you're looking to cover, and it's of interest to them. One of the key things I mentioned is, the benefit to the people that are listening. Why are they there? Is it good information? Is it information that they need to know? And if it is, and it's to their benefit, it's really going to come in handy, and it's really going to help to keep them engaged in the information. I also find that the storytelling aspect, I'm a big fan of storytelling in the beginning of an opening, or giving something that's a little shocking, maybe a number, that sometimes really draws them in. And then when you kind of bring it around, they're kind of curious about what does it all have to do with, when you can kind of grasp them in the beginning. So I don't necessarily that there's a time per se, but I think it's really up to you to be able to watch the distractions and keep them engaged with benefits to them.
Good advice there. Now, our next question. Now, doesn't hands in the pocket, the home base example, give a negative sign to the audience that you're not being open to them?
I've heard that. I've also heard the hands across the chest, kind of folding your arms means that you're kind of closing them down as well and you're not open. I'll tell you, it's also quite comfortable. I'm not telling people to walk around with their hands in their pockets. What I'm saying is that there needs to be a place that you rest your hands. It could be in your pockets. It could be folded, your arms in front of you. It could be clasped behind your back or in front of you. A lot of newscasters and whatnot always have their fingertips to one another in front of them is really the big one now for their home base. The key point is there needs to be a place. There needs to be a home base, because holding them straight by your side, sometimes, some people can do that. Sometimes it looks a little uncomfortable. But there needs to be a place where you rest them so that when you do make the big movement and the big gestures with your hands, that they're impactful. Because if you're always throwing them around, quite frankly, like I do very often, like I'm doing right now, they're less impactful to people that can see them. But quite frankly, putting your hands in your pockets, as long as you don't have change, don't take anything out of your pockets, by the way, if you are going to put your hands in your pockets, is a reasonable place, especially if you're using big hand gestures, because they're going to make it more impactful.
Thank you. What about different methods for engaging the audience, such as questions, etc.? What have you found to be the most effective methods to engage your audience?
Sure. It's important that you engage your audience, right? So what I'd like to do is within the openings, again, see what we did earlier, right, in this presentation, is ask a question. Again, it depends on the scenario. It depends on the form that you're in. But you can ask a question or put them in the shoes of a story or get them involved somehow with information that's relevant to them. You could have them think about or imagine a scenario where something is. You could ask a question like I did today about being your most unforgettable speaker, right? And then find out kind of who that person is. You could do a lot of different things. Obviously, you want to get them engaged in the beginning as well as throughout. Ideally, your goal is to get them engaged in the beginning and then keep people engaged throughout the presentation. And it could be through questions. It could be through getting them to be visually there in their heads. There's a lot of different ways to kind of do that, but it depends, again, on the form in which you're in that makes it appropriate.
Great. Thank you very much. And that is all of the questions we do have today. James, do you have any closing comments?
No, I just want to thank everybody again for joining. Hopefully this was helpful. And I'll just say again, if the 2-day workshop is something that you would be interested in going forward, I just say that please, within the question section of the presentation, just leave your email address or your name, and we can contact you about the training going forward as well, because we do them both public and also within corporations. So if you're interested in a group within a corporation to be able to come in and be able to work with people in regards to really focusing and digging deeper on the 3 Ps in the organizational model, I'm happy to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we would just like to thank all of our attendees today, as well as you, James, for your presentation. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon. This does conclude today's session. You may now disconnect. Thanks so much.